Today we'll be talking about the original Hero King's adventure. Well, not really. This is actually the remake. Although if Nintendo's history of doing remakes, well, tells me anything, it should mean that we should be in for a very well enhanced version of the original. Let's hope that's true. Prior to the events of the game, Marth's kingdom of Altea was taken by the nation of Dol, and as a result, he was forced to retreat to the island of Talise, far away from Altea, where he would eventually raise an army capable enough of taking back his homeland. Years later, and the time has come, the nation of Talise is invaded by pirates, and Marth and his army must defend it. Soon after they successfully defend the island nation, they decide that it's time to go on the journey to take back the nation of Altea once and for all. However, eventually the conflict gets to a scale where not only are they going on the journey to retake the land of Altea, but now they're going on a journey to save the entire continent as well. Now, this is basically the exact same story as the original Fire Emblem, Shadow Dragon, and the Blade of Light. The only difference is that in this version, on the normal difficulty, they added a prologue that gives us more of a context for the situation that forced Marth to retreat to the nation of Talise. Now, while yes, there are plenty of archetypes and stereotypes that are in this game, I had to constantly remind myself that this was the first game in the series that established those archetypes. I can't tell you how many times I referred to Abel, who's the Green Knight in the game, who is very similar to Lance from Binding Blade. I can't recall how many times I called Abel Lance. Like, I would look at him straight in the face, his name would literally be right next to his character portrait, and I would still call him Lance. Because they're just so similar. And that's the thing. This game was the first to establish a lot of the archetypes. So, while that is technically a bad thing, that will especially be noticeable if you've played several games in the series, like I have, you just gotta put it into context that this is the first game in the series. But for the first game in the series, it is a decent story, I would say, and Marth definitely seems to be a more down-to-earth prince than most princes in the series, especially compared to his character in Mystery of the Emblem, because in that one he is very idealistic. But in this game in particular, which I think from what I've read and researched is due to the localization team making the effort to do so, they made him a much more relatable character. He isn't this high moral ground prince. He is a young teenager who is rightfully so furious at the people who have taken his land, and he exacts revenge on them and feels no remorse for them whatsoever. And at the end of the story, you do feel that Marth has definitely underwent a very important journey. And I'm not saying the story is great or anything, but I think the story is good, personally speaking. Now, of course, the one major gripe with this story is that most people complained that since this was a game made in the series at a point where the support conversations had been well established, most people will argue that there should have been supports in the game, and I kind of agree with that as well. But the problem is that they tried staying really faithful to the original, and the original did not have those supports. They tried to make it about the main conflict as much as possible, which is why you ended up with a story where the characters themselves didn't really get that much development. And also, this is important to note because, like Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn, it really is recommended that you play this and Mystery of the Emblem at the same time, because Mystery of the Emblem, which I'm playing through right now, does a much better job of fleshing out the characters. Now in the gameplay department, the game is basically the same as its original. You have a very basic and bare bones version of the modern Fire Emblem series. Now, there are some key additions though. To start, you actually have the addition of the weapon triangle. Now this does slightly affect the strategy. It isn't too significant, but it does add something to make the game feel a bit more updated. Now as far as the balancing goes, the enemies actually aren't that good, to be honest. Although I do feel there was a bit of a weird bump, as for most of the game you are facing non-pre-promoted units as well as a lot of bad promoted units. And then all of a sudden it took a little bit of a jump, not too high of a jump obviously. For the most part, the game was pretty easy on normal mode, and trust me when I say this, you do not need to do any arena abusing at all. In fact, I definitely recommend staying as far away from the arena as possible, because it's just pointless. There's no need for it. It is not needed on normal mode. Now, if you do on harder difficulties, maybe, but for the most part, you won't need it at all. In addition, the map sizes are, generally speaking, bigger than in most Fire Emblem games. However, to start, the amount of squares or square units per for each map, there is a lot less. So your units move across maps faster, and in addition, you also have a lot more movement given to your unit. For example, the starting movement stat for Cavaliers is 9. For sword users, as specifically Myrmidons and Heroes, as well as Marth, they start off with 7 movement. Mages have 6 movement. There are only a couple of units that have 5 movement, like the Cleric class and the Curate class, which are the female and male versions of the Healer class, respectively. But for the most part, getting your unit across the maps, rather, isn't too difficult. Only on a couple of maps where they kind of make it very obvious, they make a very blatant effort to make that a issue, getting your units, maneuvering your units across the map. Only in those type of maps, which there weren't that many of, was it ever really an issue. But that wasn't the design of the map anyway, so it wasn't like the whole game had that design flaw. It's only a couple of maps. Although another problem with the game is that it can be potentially a bit broken, because you get the warp staff early in the game. Now, I didn't use the warp staff until later in the game, but it got to a point where I found out that you can actually break the game pretty hard by using the warp staff. The warp staff in this game has unlimited range. It can take any adjacent ally to any point on the map that isn't occupied by an enemy unit. So what I ended up doing in one of the chapters was that I literally took Marth and I warped him to the point. Because all the objectives in the maps are seize point, except for the last chapter, which is defeat the boss. Other than the last chapter, this trick works on any map. You can literally just warp Marth to the occupied space on the map, and chapter over. It's done. It is literally probably the most broken thing in the entire series. The fact that I could clear a chapter in 3 minutes. That's just crazy. That's very, very crazy. One last thing I forgot to mention was that in this game, what was a new addition from a gameplay perspective was the reclass system. Basically, you can reclass units at any level, and they will become a different class. Now, there are two, branches that you have for each unit. For example, a Berserker class. For the most part, Berserker, like axe-wielding units, can only become similar units. So you can't have an axe user become like a Myrmidon. And Myrmidons are usually limited to classes like the Cavalier class and the Archer class. So you can't take one unit and change them into any unit of your desire. There are limits. But you can do it at any level, and usually if you're changing from one class that uses one weapon to another class that uses a completely different weapon, you will usually gain weapon ranks in that other class if you switch classes as a promoted unit. So, and since you can do it on a chapter by chapter basis, and you don't have to pay any money to by seals that allow you to change classes or anything like that. This means that it gives the user a lot of freedom to experiment with the different classes that they could potentially use. And this is something that I think makes the game kind of fun and can also be an additional strategy that you can use over the course of your time with the game. Now, as far as the soundtrack is concerned, it is a pretty faithful remake of the original soundtrack. I like it. Nothing too complex or anything of the like. It's a decent soundtrack and it does the game well in terms of preserving the original's feel and overall sense, I guess you could say. It preserves the game's qualities from a musical perspective. And visually speaking is where the game kind of takes a bit of a change. The new art designer for the character designs kind of went for a more realistic approach. They aren't really that good in my opinion. Mystery of the Emblem does fix this, specifically New Mystery of the Emblem. While I don't find the character designs in Shadow Dragon to be bad, I definitely prefer the one from Path of Radiance, the GBA games. I almost prefer even the ones from Fire Emblem 4 more than these because they just look weird, personally speaking, and they don't really suit the series that well. The game isn't bad, it's just that its main faults stem from the fact that the creators did not do a good job of updating the game enough. There are certain things that must be kept when you're making a remake, sure, but whatever faults lie in the game originally, those should be fixed. It's like having the chance of being able to look over a paper a second time after writing it. It's understandable that the faults were there when you first wrote it, but when you look over the paper, you should be able to see the things that are not correct. And unfortunately, I just think they stuck too faithfully to the original rather than trying to make the game feel a bit more new and different. And this is definitely reflected in the story, as the story is basically the same as it was in Shadow Dragon, the original NES game. While that is the case though, it does make this game, probably more than any other game in the series, the best starting place, because pretty much every game after Fire Emblem 1 and 11 respectively has more to offer in pretty much every area, whether it be in story, characters, gameplay, visuals. Pretty much every game has more to offer, which means that it only goes up from this point on. And because Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon is so bare bones, it means that there aren't too many things that new players have to take on and able to appreciate the game. In addition, there are save points placed in every chapter, so there is a checkpoint system of sorts in each chapter which allows for an easier transition for more casual players without giving them casual mode, which can lead to developing some bad habits for future games, especially older games where the casual mode isn't available at all. Anyway, that's all for this review, and next time will be the final installment, at least up to this date, of the Fire Emblem retrospective, and that game will be Fire Emblem 12 New Mystery of the Emblem, a remake of the SNES classic Fire Emblem Mystery of the Emblem.